Welcome back to Between Two Racks with the Kilo Crew. Today's episode, we're going to discuss why the basics are still the basics. So, let's kick it. I know a conversation I often hear, like Alex and Steph say for years now, is how in our industry, everything comes back around. So even when it comes to diets, strength training, fads usually come, they leave, and then they come back around. But I do feel that the basics in terms of strength training have kind of always stayed around. It's just that they haven't always been the cool, hip thing that people are doing. So why do you guys believe that the same core strength principles continue to outperform the latest trends?
I've been training for 36 years. I've been a personal trainer, coach for 26 years. And like you said, we've seen things come, go, disappear, blah, blah, blah. But the one thing that always stayed are the tried and true barbells and dumbbells, multi-joint, compound lifts. That's been around for 100 plus years. Yeah. And I think they're going to stick. And I'll give you an example. There are things that came into the industry that are well-intended, but they've been promoted as a one-size-fits-all type of modality. But after a while, and with more research behind these things, they realize certain flaws, which then brings them back to the classic. So, for example, like stability or unstable surface training. So when I first started as a personal trainer in 99, it was kind of like the new trend, like they called it functional training. And it was training on like Swiss ball, Bosu balls, or any type of unstable surface because it fires a bunch of stabilizers, agonists, antagonists. So the antagonists have to contract to stabilize your body through space. So a lot of trainers at the time viewed this as a training modality that had more upside than just barbells and dumbbells. But the thing is, yes, working on stability on unstable surface does have a really cool advantage for a return to training. Let's say you've had an injury. Let's say you haven't trained in a while. You can do a phase or two on unstable surface to work the agonist antagonist synergistically, work the stabilizers and all that kind of stuff. But the problem is a lot of coaches were like, well, this is so good because my client was injured. We did a phase or 2 months of this type of training. He felt better, strength increased. Hence, we're going to train this way forever, and we're going to train running backs that way, and on and on and on and on. But one of the problems is, in order to be really strong and powerful, like really, really good athletes are able to fire the agonist and relax the antagonist. But if your training modalities never allow you to be in a situation where you're relaxing the antagonist, then you're missing out on true strength potential. So if you're doing a squat or a power clean or whatever it might be, a basic multi-joint movement, the better you get at it, the better you're learning at firing the agonist and relaxing the antagonist. But training an unstable surface does not allow that. You're always firing the antagonist alongside the agonist in order to stabilize your body through space. So just little neurophysiological things like this that were maybe missed out of the functional training world, that made it so that after a while, at least in elite strength coaching circles, they realize it might not be the way to go to develop the elite athlete in the long term. So then we started seeing a trend going away from functional training, coming back to basics. Now, there you still see, like I saw a few years ago, Alvin Kamara, a New Orleans Saints running back, still training on unstable surfaces, like during the off season. Again, I don't know the context of the whole. It was just a video, right? Who knows? Maybe it was like phase one, whatever. But if he's doing that the entire off season, Alvin Kamara is good because he's Alvin Kamara. It's definitely not because he's juggling on a Swiss ball.
Didn't we already see like someone back squat like a barbell standing on the Swiss ball?
I'm sure.
And it's like, talk about functional training. It's not when you're playing sport, the surface you're on is stable. You're the one who's running around and unstable. Like doesn't have a whole lot of carryover to their sport.
Yeah, but it was well intended. Like remember when we did in the early days in '98 when we did Paul Check's certification series on VHS tapes.
Oh yeah.
Like he was promoting like squatting on a Swiss ball, but if I remember correctly, it was for a very targeted situation. But it's just that people took that and extrapolated it to be used on everything, and you're just never going to reach really high level of strength and power if your training is just that. But that's just an example. But there's been so many things.
But I do think it ties it all pretty much into what you're saying, is just some people view the basics as being too simple, and then they want all of
especially nowadays with Instagram and social media, everyone wants to put the fun, flashy stuff, but like the basics is what works and have stood through the test of time. Like we've done it years and years and decades and hundreds of years, and we know they work. So
yeah, and then even when it comes to the basics, when we're just looking at exercise selection, it sort of comes back to what we were talking about last week with training economy. The basics of really high training economy. So you're getting a ton of benefit out of these very basic, simple exercises. Well, simple, very basic exercises. They're not simple when you actually understand the complexity behind them. But so once you've got that high level of training economy, then if you're going to try and replace that with, so say you're trying to replace a squat, it might take 6 exercises to get the same training effect that the squat alone provided. So it then becomes a very not ineffective, but like very cumbersome training session to try and inefficient. Yeah. So,
and then I know kind of what we've been talking about more. We've been discussing exercises, but when we say the basics, it doesn't only apply to exercises. It applies to other parts of programming and periodization.
Yeah, so like even as simple as your training structure, like if you want to get the best strength training effect, you train that exercise in a fresh state. So you train it at the start of the session. So like that, there's a very basic principle that has stood the test of time, and it's not going to go away. You're never going to get to your strongest if you want to improve your squat, and the squat is the last thing you do in your lower body training session. So it's one of those, is there a time and place that the squat might be the last thing you do? Yeah, sure. But it's definitely not a maximum strength phase. Yeah. So stuff like that there, then like the just underlying principles behind periodization, that we're trying to manage fatigue while peak fitness at specific times throughout the year or throughout the macro or meso, whatever way you want to look at it. So at certain times we're really trying to impose a lot of stress, knowing at another time that stress is going to be deloaded or unloaded so we can peak fitness a little higher. So all those basic principles remain the same. It's just the application of them, and if people disregard them, they'll still get results, but it'll just never be to the same heights as what is possible.
So in regards to what you're saying, then volume and intensity become part of the basics when it comes to programming?
Yes.
So how do you define or teach the inverse relationship between volume and intensity in a way that new coaches can understand? So
when we really look at strength training, there's 2 big triggers that we can play with. One is we can push volume, so we're getting a volume response. We're increasing work capacity, increasing the potential for muscle mass, or we can push intensity, which is really going to be more on the neurological side of things. So it's going to improve your what is referred to as your central factors, so your intermuscular coordination, your intramuscular coordination, and you inhibit the disinhibitory factors within the neurological system. So you have a better ability to display your strength, and you have less signals trying to dampen your ability to display it. So like the examples always given is the mother lifting the car off their baby. Like everyday life, you can't do that, but in a fight or flight sort of situation that you have zero option but to do this, your nervous system disinhibits these factors and allows you to express strength that you have the ability to express, but is possibly not safe for your body to express. So the not so fun side of the situation is when the mother does that, she probably rips every tendon, like, ligament in her body. But it's one of those that the ability to express that strength there, it's just your body's protective mechanisms is trying to stop itself getting injured. So,
and to go along with the disinhibitory components, it's like just to prove, I'm coming back to the exercises, but to kind of prove the efficacy of like standard strength training exercises, those disinhibitory factors, there's like two main components, right? There's like muscle spindles that are related to fast eccentric contractions. Yep. So, for example, doing Olympic weightlifting or plyometric exercises, as you're getting better at those, well, you're improving, you're desensitizing muscle spindles through, your tolerance to fast eccentrics. And then there's the Golgi tendon organism that's more related to tension. Yep. So if you're always doing exercise modalities that are submaximal in nature because they're so complex or require so much stability, then you can never overload your system with heavy enough load to create a disinhibitory component of the Golgi tendon organs to desensitize your nervous system to high load. So you're taking away a huge learning aspect of neural factors when it comes to strength training. And those are just so much easier to accomplish through basic training modalities.
Yeah. And then one important factor is your body's somewhat overprotective. So it kicks in these factors way too early for like your true strength potential. So to actually get the decent levels of strength, you have to create the ability to disinhibit them. Because, so say you're brand new to training and you go and you put 85% of your 1RM on a bar, there's a chance that you just can't move that. It's not because your strength isn't there, it's just your body's inability to, or doesn't want to let you fire the motor units in an efficient enough way for that to occur. But as you build more and more resiliency and dampen these factors, your body's going to be okay. All right, I know I've done this before. I can let this force capability to occur. So it's very, very protective, and we need to dampen down that response because obviously at some point you can't dampen it, or everyone will be pulling, like blowing tendons every time they go into a training session. Yeah. But to a certain extent, we need to dampen it down if we want any level of strength response. So that's why at times we definitely need to train at high intensities. Because
I'm sorry to cut you, but to go along with your point, like the thing is, the novice trainee typically is not very efficient at recruiting high threshold motor units or fast twitch fibers. Yeah. So if you're not efficient at recruiting fast twitch fibers, it makes it really hard to be highly effective at high loads. Yep. But training at high loads is absolutely crucial for long-term development.
Yeah.
It's like you have to trick your nervous system into not thinking it's a high load. So like the whole progressive overload is if you increase the weight incrementally. But what's the example you always give with the cow, the farmer?
Milo, the legend of Milo of Croton. Yeah, so that's Greek mythology. So it's this Milo, this little kid that had a little baby calf, and every day would carry the calf across the farm and he did it every day. So by the time the calf was a grown adult, Milo became the strongest man on earth because, I mean, he was able to carry around that cow very easily because he did it every day. And as the calf grew bigger and bigger and bigger, it was progressive overload. Yeah. I mean, that's a story, of course.
Yeah. But it's the same, like
really
you know, like people see like what I post or whatever in some lifts that I have, and they're like, oh, I'm going to try that. And I'm like, no. You don't just like try like a certain weight. Like you work up to it. That's what we do. You know, from week 1, we have goals. Like we know we increase a little bit. But yeah, that's how you kind of trick
the one thing that's tricky with progressive overload, though, that I think it's important people understand, and to go along with you bringing up volume and intensity, is like one of the reason why true linear periodization actually does not exist is true linear periodization means that training load keeps increasing progressively over time in a linear manner. And training load is a reflection of volume load, which is a reflection of volume and intensity. So to build a linear rise in training load means that both volume and intensity increases all the time in a linear fashion. But that's not possible. There's just so long you can actually do this. So it's important to understand that that's why basic program design and periodization evolved to a point where now we recognize the inverse relationship, and we recognize that there should be manipulation in volume and intensity in order to actually have a linear progression in terms of strength. So like the legend of Milo is a cool story, but it's just important to know that you cannot just blindly be like, okay, well, I'll start with 1 set of 8.
Oh, yeah.
And then for the rest
Then
of
2 sets of 8,
Maybe.
3 sets of 8,
Yeah.
4 sets of 8 with more and more and more and more weight. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So like going back to the basics of volume and intensity now, if you look at any of the basic periodization models, there's always going to be that inverse relationship. So when we're stressing volume, intensity is going to be lower. When we're stressing intensity, volume is going to be lower. And it's to allow for the recovery aspect within the training phase that you're currently in. So that there's why that is now a basic and should always be there. And while sometimes you can get away from it, it's never for long. And you're always going to do the best, especially strength outcomes, when you follow that.
Yeah. I mean, when you're not looking at those things, you're basically not using any form of periodization with your training. And that's kind of...
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Like you could say it's standard periodization because you do 5x5 for the rest of your life, because 3 to 5 reps of 3 to 5 sets is what's seemingly the gold standard for strength training now. But there's just more to it than doing those rep ranges for life.
Yeah.
So there's just...
But this doesn't work because eventually you reach a point of what's the term that's used in the literature?
Accommodation.
Yeah, that's not the term I was looking for, but involution.
Okay.
So you actually start like detraining because your body just cannot keep adapting to the exact same stress over and over and over. It's the perfect example is, because I've had that back in the days, is you have your new client, you start asking questions, and then it's, oh yeah, I'm very active. I do 4 laps around the block every day. Do 4 laps every day. Well, for how long have you been doing this? Years and years and years. Well, the first time he did this, these 4 laps might have been a pretty good stress, but now he's so used to it that these 4 laps basically does nothing.
Yeah.
Because he's always doing the same thing.
And like an even more extreme example of that is like the fitness instructor that does the aerobic classes. So teaches 2 spin classes a day, 2 jazzercise classes a day. So their activity levels through the roof, but they are eating 1,500 calories, and if they eat more, they do put on weight, and it's all messed up. So
yeah, so that's why no matter what some people try to say, periodization is here to stay, because it's a basic tenet of training.
Training.
Not just strength training in general.
Yeah. So going back to kind of how we started it with the basics and then how it correlates to exercise selection, it then also goes into something we spoke on in the last podcast episode where it's movement patterns versus muscle groups when you're looking at programming. And to me, the basics, when we think of basics, we're thinking of the squat, the overhead press, chin up, deadlift. So those are all categorized under movement patterns versus muscle groups. So why do you guys find that, I know we discussed it a little bit, but I think we can go into it further for this episode, why that should be such a basic principle of when you're looking at program design versus looking at muscle groups?
I think it's like, even people who don't necessarily, who aren't trainers, like the basic principle of like push-pull. If you want a balanced body, you need to do both. You need to do exercises that push and some that pull. Same for the upper body, for the lower body. And that just takes care of a lot of the basic muscles that are required for that movement without having to think of like every single muscle group and making sure that you cover all the different muscle groups, because you're more focused on all the muscles involved in a basic movement, like pushing and pulling. You can do vertical, horizontal, front, back when it comes to the lower body.
Yeah, like it wasn't really until bodybuilding became a big thing that anyone considered training, I'm going to look at it on a muscle group perspective, because no one gave a shit. Everyone wanted to be, like, they're trained for strength or training for a very specific purpose.
Performance.
Yeah, so they're looking at, or what do I need to do to be better at that, which generally was a movement pattern. And then bodybuilding became bigger, and it's like, I need bigger quads, so I'm going to do things to bias my quads. But once you go down that rabbit hole, it's such a specific thing you're looking at. So unless you are a bodybuilder who needs very specific muscle groups to create the symmetrical look that they're looking, it's just not as efficient. So it harps back to the training economy. Like, we want to have the biggest bang for our buck exercises that it's going to train a ton of muscle groups all at once, and then we can do smaller exercises throughout at the end of the session to fill in gaps that were needed to be filled in. But like, once you're training for the movement pattern, you're training for a function. You're training to be able to display strength in a certain manner. So it's just got way bigger upside.
If you think of the outcome is different too, like in terms of if you're training for performance, like look at those athlete bodies versus if you're training muscle groups and you're really trying to target specific things, and then you compare that to like the bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Well, a good example, and Mike Stone talks about this. It's he calls it, I always forget the term he uses. Forgetting the term, like targeted or in specific hypertrophy. So if you take a bodybuilder who wants to have the biggest quad in the world, well, he's going to, do a variety of exercises that's going to stimulate the main muscle of the quad through different parts of the resistance curve so that the entire quad can grow so he can display that size. But if you look at a high-level sprinter typically does not have super developed vastus medialis. Like, the musculature around the knee joint is usually not super developed. Why? Because if you have more weight around that joint, you're actually decreasing the velocity potential of
hip flexion,
the hip flexion, knee flexion extension on foot striking. So if you look at top-level sprinters, the majority of their hypertrophy in the quad is higher, closer to the closer to the hip, where most of the force-generating potential of hip movement come from that area. And this is because the majority of sprinter spends 90% of their quad volume on back squats. Okay, they're not necessarily doing like a ton of leg extension or CC squats or on and on and on and on. So the hypertrophy gain in the muscle reflects the task that they're doing to get better at sprinting. So, why was I talking about this?
Specific hypertrophy versus so muscle.
Movement versus muscle group. So, and again, we're not delusional. I just want to make sure people understand. It's not that we don't think muscles are important, because obviously muscles is what allow you to do a movement.
Well, and I still think in terms of muscle groups for you guys, you look at the structure of the training session, and then you then kind of make sure you dispatch across all of the different training sessions certain muscle groups.
Well, it's more movement still.
Yeah, but it's movements that are going to bias certain muscle groups. So, but once you prioritize what movement you want, it obviously, as long as that is somewhat
like covered,
so you will target everything.
But like for example, so squat for us is a primary movement. So we're squatting. That's our main movement. Now we know that there are muscles involved in the squat. The lower back, the glutes, the hamstrings, the quads, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, adductor magnus, whatever. There's all these muscles. We get it. But depending on your body dimensions, depending on your structure, not all of these muscles are targeted equally. So then we still, via movement analysis, now determine a specific, not muscle, but a specific movement that will strengthen a muscle that can be a limiting factor in the task of the squat. So if we figure that one of the weakness on the lifter squat is a weak lower back coming off of the bottom of the squat, then he has a ass to grass squat, well, then we know that bottom range hip extension might be a limiting factor. So what's a bottom range hip extension movement? Seated good morning. So we're going to prescribe a seated good morning, but we're not prescribing a seated good morning because we're looking for a lower back movement. Yeah. Because if we were just looking at program design as, oh, I need lower back. Well, lower back it could be horizontal back extension. It could be hip thrust. But if we only look at training through body parts, then our program design would be clearly not optimal because that specific athlete or trainee does not need hip thrust to help their squat. They need a seated morning. So at the end of the day, every decision that we take in program design is in regards to the primary movement. But obviously, as we're choosing our exercises, then we're targeting muscles. But the point is, we look at movement first to address the muscles instead of looking at the muscles first without thinking of movement. Because outside of bodybuilding, it's a very counterproductive way to look at training. I mean, when I started writing training programs when I was 11, that's how I would do it. You know, I read in the book, okay, triceps, biceps, quad. I didn't even really know the different muscles in quad. All I knew was quad, hamstrings. Okay, now I need a quad. What's a quad? Leg extension. What's a quad? But that's it.
Yeah, and then even if it was more of a hypertrophy oriented program, and say we're not looking, okay, their squat is weak because of this, and this. We're saying, all right, we're trying to train for muscle mass, so our volume's a little higher. We need to be very specific of the stressors to balance everything throughout the week. We could be looking saying, all right, we know we have trained the quads through a lengthened position or a bottom to mid position through the squat, but I want more quad volume that day. Okay, I'm going to try and choose something that's more mid-range to top, so maybe a low stance on a leg press. And at least then we know we're just distributing the stressors throughout the whole training session. We're tapping into different motor units, so we're not going to dip firstly, we're not going to cause as much muscle damage, but then in reflection, we're not going to dip the recovery curve as low. So while it's somewhat more of a muscle group looking at it, we're still doing it in terms of the movement pattern as a whole, because what does that muscle group do as a movement pattern, and how do we stress different portions of that movement pattern?
Yeah. And I think it might sound too basic for some, but it's obviously, it kind of drives everything we do. But it truly is taking your client and looking at those primary movements. And it might sound basic to just identify where their weaknesses are and then strengthen that. But that's kind of like the best to do for your clients. And people don't view it as, because I think people hear us say, okay, we squat, we overhead press, we do all those basic lifts, but we're doing those because we know how valuable they are in the programming, but then to build the rest off of the programming off of where that person's weaknesses is. So it sounds basic, but it's not when you're really trying to build out a full program for a client.
But these exercises though, like those basic exercises
are nothing but basic.
No, but like, so I'll give another exercise modality example. So after the whole functional training vibe from the late 90s, then I would say 2005, 6-ish, then it became really popular sports-specific training. I remember like I was living in St. Louis at the time, and like there was this chain that was starting up, which was like 30-minute golf or whatever the hell. And it was a strength training center that catered to golfers. And it was 30 minutes workout, and every exercise was golf specific. So you guessed it, like doing a golf swing with bands or pulleys and stuff like that. But this to me is a misinterpretation of dynamic correspondence from Verkhoshansky.
Yep.
Because, okay, basically you look at dynamic correspondence and it says that, well, the more specific to the task you are, the better the transfer is. But the problem is, what's the true most specific thing you can do for an athlete? The sport. So now, why do you strength train for a sport? To improve the overarching
human qualities.
Human qualities like strength, power, endurance, whatever it might be. Now, once the athlete has higher levels of strength, power, endurance, now they can take that new strength, power, and endurance and translate it to better performance at golf. But in order to gain more strength or power, you need true overload. You need something that will overload the central nervous system and the muscular system enough to create a stimulating response in order to grow in size and strength. But if you're trying to be so specific right from the get-go, now not only are you not really specific to your golf swing, because the angular velocities of your swing with the pulleys are so slow that it doesn't really carry over to golf. The actual body positioning does not really carry over to golf. But then on top of this, those are so unloadable that now you're not even loading the central nervous system, or are you creating enough muscular tension on the musculature to build any types of size. So now all of these training modalities that you're doing to be more sports specific, you're actually in essence just burning calories because you're doing nothing. You're not really improving your biomotor abilities, nor are you really improving your golf swing.
But isn't it kind of making it worse though?
Well, in certain cases it can, yeah.
Because if you're teaching them to move slowly and it's a different like strength curve and whatever, when they get to their sport, then it's going to be...
Like I remember, like I think it's Vern Gambetta, but in the early 2000s, like some NHL goalies, what they started doing was they got a little smarter. They knew that if you're doing drills with a higher load than what you're used to in your sport, you're disrupting the motor pattern and the intermuscular coordination skills. So they started doing drills with implements that were actually lighter than what they were using in game.
So they go faster.
So they actually learned to get faster.
Yeah. It's like over speed or something.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
So for example, they would use hockey sticks and gloves, and I don't know the name in English. In French, we call it a biscuit.
Oh,
The-
A cookie?
yeah, good for you.
But I don't. In English, I don't know. Like the glove they wear to hold the
protect.
stick,
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
and they would be lighter. So then they would be doing all of their like splits and all that kind of stuff with lighter implements. So then when they would put their actual uniform on, they felt like they could move faster. So they kind of used the sport specific, but at least. I mean, this was just technical work. It was
Yeah.
not, it wasn't
Yeah.
part of the strength training session,
Yeah.
but at least they understood the overspeed
concept.
component.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
but that's the problem with some of the trainers out there, like that they do the sport-specific movements in the gym
Yeah.
that are slower.
Well,
heavier.
like it's like in Rocky V when Stallone's doing punches with 30-pound dumbbells.
But it sort of goes back to like the shot putters, like they'll throw shots slightly heavier and slightly lighter than the competition shot.
Yeah.
But it's not as part of their
it's-
strength training regime. It is a part of their skill practice and maybe a little bit of transfer come the very end. But it's a very small portion of what they do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
It's not
like-
a huge difference by any means.
And not Rocky V, by the way, Balboa. I'm sorry.
I'm sure everyone's going to comment that is not the right movie.
So I know we've kind of covered different concepts going back to why we believe the basics are the basics. But why do you believe that it is that the more experienced the coach becomes, the more they end up relying on the basics?
Because you've tried the other things and you see that you get more benefit, you get more results, you get better outcomes from doing the basics. I mean, a lot of clients do want to do the fun stuff, and maybe you do a little bit of that at the end, but you know that to get the most results is the basic movements.
I think of the
'cause they
story,
work.
I think you've told it on the podcast before, but you had that one client that always liked to do things on the ball.
Yes.
So and she wouldn't work with you if she didn't do some stuff on the
Exactly.
ball, but you still spent the majority of the session doing what you wanted to do, and then you gave her.
Like I gave her 5-10 minutes at the end, and then we tried all these different things on the ball. But but she still, I mean, that was the deal. She
Yeah.
still did all the basic exercises that she complained about the whole time, just so she could get to the end. And then it's like, feeding your kids the broccoli. Like, make sure you got to give them a little something so that they get the good stuff.
Yeah, it sort of comes down to like, I'd like to think this happens with most experienced coaches, that they might try lots of different things and they'll keep some things and they'll discard other things, but they'll always find that it is all in conjunction of training the basics, and then they'll use these small elements to influence very specific factors at specific times. But if you're overhauling your full system every 2 to 3 years because of something new, you're fucking up.
Yeah.
So if you have slight adjustments and slight variations and you're bringing in new techniques all the time, that's cool. But it should be in the presence of the basics, because that's been here for hundreds of years. It's going to be here in another 100 because it works. It's very, very time efficient. It's very it's trackable. We know we have an expected outcome from. We know if someone squats, they're going to get better at squatting. When they get better at squatting, they're going to be able to express more force through their lower body. Once they're able to express more force, they're going to be able to transfer more force into the ground. So they're going to be able to move faster. They're going to be able to jump higher. So it's a known quantity. If you are now saying, all right, we do not need to squat because I am doing whatever the new thing is. Yeah, exactly. Whatever that is.
Jerky movement.
You are 100% throwing your faith into luck. Like it's going to be luck. It may work, it may not, it may have scientific backing. Even if it does have scientific backing, it doesn't mean an awful lot these days.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those that the basics are always going to be there. You always should be adding tools to your toolbox, 100%, but it should be the
Let
addition.
the basics stay.
It
Yeah.
should be in addition to the basics.
And the body hasn't evolved much in the last thousands of years, so we know it works.
But, like the things that have improved over time are like nuances and technicalities, but it's not the core elements of strength training that actually change. But to answer your question, to me, why is the advanced coach realizing that sticking to basics is better? I think that when you're a younger coach, you want to please your clients. You want your clients to be happy. You want to build your clientele. You're going to do and try a bunch of different things to make your client happy. But I think that the longer you've been doing this profession, at one point you realize that you, as the coach, in order to feel not content, to feel like you're doing your job properly, you realize that, you know what, man, like we need to get back to the basics, because at the end of the day, people, and when I'm saying people, like the general population, they need to understand that if they set foot in a gym, the purpose of a strength training facility is to build strength and, by default, hypertrophy. That's it. That's what strength training does.
Yeah.
So in order to build strength and hypertrophy, there's not a million ways to do it. You lift the weights properly. You have variations. You have periodization. You have intent. You have heavy weights. That's the only way to do it. And when you've been doing it for a while, you realize that all the other things are just bullshit to make your client feel happy. But at the end of the day, if they're coming to you and they're paying you for training, it's for one thing and one thing only. And if you're not providing this, what are we doing? Like, you know, you don't need strength. If that's not what you want, you don't need strength training. If you just want to move and have fun, go do another task. Go play tennis. Go play basketball.
Classes,
go do classes. But don't say that you're into strength training if all you do is bullshit exercises all day.
Yeah.
That's not what strength training is. And I'm not trying to be a pure. Well, I guess I am trying to be a purist, but I love strength training. I fell in love with strength training when I was 11, and that's what strength training does. It doesn't lengthen your muscle.
My muscles would be real long.
I mean, I think the perfect is, because my mom is like she's never ever been to the gym, never ever lifted any weights, but she's been obviously following me now for years, and she sees now as I'm getting older, she knows Alex well now. She knows Alex is in her 50s. She knows she's still strong. She trains. So when she was here in March, she asked for a training program. So, I mean, it's basic. Like because she doesn't have the strength to do the things. She's in her 60s. So we came up with a basic training program, still having the movement pattern, still getting her to move through everything. And she's been doing that since March. Consistently, for my mom, is like at least she's been doing it 2 times a week. We told her the goal is 3. And just the other day I was talking to her on the phone, and she was like, I was in the backyard and I was setting up the garden, and she was going through just like a normal task she always does, where she has to lift over the hose, step up onto a thing. And she noticed how much easier it is for her now. Yeah, so it's cool. Like those clients who are coming to you, it takes time for them to realize, because I've been telling my mom this for years, that she needs strength training, and now she's finally come around to it.
Better late than never.
It does make a difference. I have another question that I wanted to ask you guys, which I think is a cool one to get your perspective on. So, what are signs that a program is basic but brilliant versus basic and lazy?
Ooh. So it's really hard to tell on a program, because like one program in isolation doesn't mean an awful lot. One program, or not one program, like the continuity of programs over time is where the brilliance comes in. So like any program could be basic and brilliant, but not any. A program can be basic and brilliant, but looks basic and lazy when you don't know what happened before it and what's happening after it. Yeah. Because like a program could be, they're doing 5x5 on a squat, they're doing a lunge, they're doing a leg curl, they're doing a step up and they're doing a hip extension. It could, like, that's what their lower body session might look like. And that you're just, all right, that's okay. It's good. There's nothing wrong with it. But is that just what you do all the time? But without knowing what came before it, what's coming after it, what's coming after the after, it doesn't mean anything. So that's the hard part with that question, because the beauty is in the details, and the details happen over a long term.
I mean, yes.
But for me, like I find this question hard to answer, because I think the word lazy to me messes it up. So brilliant, well, because like Pork said, like brilliant, like you would need to know the context and where it's situated in a long-term plan, and on and on and on. But okay, well, if the program has some very basic structures where the order of exercises for most complex to least complex, from multi-joint to single joint, highest intensity first, and blah, blah, blah. The tempo prescriptions make sense. The set and rep volume makes sense. The rest periods make sense. Okay, if all this makes sense, doesn't mean it's brilliant. I don't know, but it could be a brilliant program because the structure of it, the components of it makes complete sense. Now, lazy is a weird one to me, because lazy doesn't mean bad program. So lazy to me would be like those programs you see where it's, lower body workout, squat, leg press, leg extension, leg curl, seated calf raise, 3x10. That's it. Yeah. That to me is a lazy program, because there's no
nuances.
There's no deep thoughts in it. It's 3x10 on everything. Seated calf raise is predominantly slow twitch, but let's do 10 reps. It doesn't matter. There's no tempo prescriptions. There is no rest period. 3 sets across the board for every. So that to me is a lazy program, but it doesn't. So that to me is,
or it sort of goes back to the whole movement pattern versus muscle group, because you'll see this. We definitely see this is when someone's like, all right, they're going to do a overhead press, then they're going to do a flat press, and then C series comes and we're going to go, oh, we'll do biceps and tries. Well, what do you mean biceps and tries? Come on. We're better than that. There is more to it than just saying we're training our biceps and triceps. We can be selective. We can really think through what we need to train, where we need to train it. So stuff like that there, I consider lazy programming. It's like, oh, fair enough, they've covered the basics, great, but then like smaller details, it's just like, all right.
But the laziest program is not writing a program down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There you go. That's true.
But
unless you have one of those amazing minds that keeps it all in. Or you have
that trainer that does the same, like changes programs every day, but does the same program for all their clients.
Oh yeah, we've seen this. But then, like, to go along with what Pork was saying, like us, we're so detail oriented that even for me, like if I see a program, squat, okay, fine. Leg curl, well, which one?
Yeah.
Back extension,
which one?
Yeah. Step up, which one?
Yeah. Row, which grip?
Yeah, which grip? But bent over, seated, barbell.
You know what you think is lazy, but in Train Heroic or whatever programming software, when the exercises aren't detailed and written properly, you find that drives you shithouse. Like, it's obviously not in ours, but if someone doesn't have like all the words in the exercise.
Well, no, yeah, because because like Pork was thinking, the genius, the brilliance in programming is the bigger picture plan.
Yeah.
Well, in order to see if a bigger picture plan is brilliant, well, it's all about the details and how the details progresses to make sure that over time everything is balanced and appropriate. But if it's always leg curl, row, blah, 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 well, then we don't know. So then, like, are we doing, is the person always doing a closed neutral grip row, or is there some variations?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna end this one on a fun one, because we got our 100-cup coffee percolator for our event this weekend, and I made a story yesterday asking for people to name it. So I have a favorite, but I'm just going to read through them. You guys can react, but I'm just going to read through all the names.
I haven't heard any of them.
No, I know. I haven't. I purposely did
So wait,
not
are we
share.
voting? Or you're just reading
I'm
them?
going to read them. You
Okay.
can somewhat react, and then in the end, we'll choose our favorite one. Okay. Gigantor, Big Rig, Bruce, Beanie, Java Joe, Big Joe, Titan, Bruce Lee, like Bruce Lee,
Okay.
Mocahontas, Java Unit.
Is that Nick Ruff?
Yeah. Brutus, the Beast, Rob Jr.,
Rob Jr.
Fred, Sarah, Theo, Coffee, Tank, the Coffinator, Coffee by the Kilo, or Kilo Fiend, or Kilo Fiendinator, Mr. Bean, FOMO, Biggie, Porrick Percolator, Mocha Joe, Bompa, Thumper, Rin Tin Tin. What was the name of the homeless guy who watched over the Huntington Beach spot? Name it after him.
Bob.
Bob. KB, Kilo Brew, Bender, Brutus, Drago, and Turbo. I know my favorite.
I like 2.
I like 2.
I'd have to hear them again.
Okay, so what are your favorites?
The GGGG
Yeah,
Java unit
Java,
is very good. And then Rob Jr. just for the absolute...
That was Rob.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
yeah.
but like just because it's so ridiculous.
I like Big Rig, and I like the Kilo Finator.
Okay. I liked Bompa
I was like, yeah, I like the Bumpa one.
because it makes
it
all the
makes-
noise, and it kind of reminds me how you said thumper, but I was like bumper, and then I do like the
Bumper,
No, Bumpa.
No, it's
like,
Bompa.
like Tudor Bumper.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. That's kind of cool.
But it's nothing to do with coffee.
All right. We still haven't made a decision. These are the...
So maybe we'll get back. I know you were Mr. Bean. You sent in Mr. Bean. I mean, the Java unit
It's kind of fun.
will need to be part of it. Maybe it needs to have a full name.
Like a first and a last name.
That could be the middle name.
Okay, we'll let you know after because it's
Yeah.
not going to be that quick of a decision, apparently. Thanks for tuning in. Like, subscribe, share, rate.